Okay, so when we talk about this whole notion of presidential power, then one of the nice ways, or like a nice way to kind of think about presidential power, is through this concept called the roles of the president. And they're actually, one of the articles in your reader is by a guy named Clinton Rossiter. And he's a person that really takes a kind of an expansive view on presidential power. I mean, not really so expansive, but it's just this idea that we expect modern presidents to perform a lot of different functions. Definitely a great example of how we've evolved and changed over time. And so if you'll take those powers and those things we've been talking about and simply classify it into these roles, it's as though when the president performs these roles, it's like they're putting on a different hat. And so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and show you some pictures that are some examples of these roles, and you've got them there on your paper. And all you need to do is just kind of record different examples, of what the president, what powers the president is using when they perform these roles. So chief executive is obvious, right? That's kind of like, I would liken that to being CEO of the country. It's when the president is providing direction. They are being directive. They are, they're kind of like setting the tone for what's going to happen in the country. Chief legislator is anything that is in a relationship to law making. So signing bills, vetoing bills, State of the Union, suggesting legislation. Like I said, I think I talked about this last class, LBJ did a phenomenal job of this because of his experience in the legislature. So he knew that's where the power lied, and he figured out how to use the presidency to get them to pass certain pieces of legislation. Chief diplomat is just being the face of our country. It's the idea that the president should interact with other people, and they're going to help to set the tone for what our relationships are going to look like. Modern presidents didn't do this as much, but our world is much smaller due to globalization. So the reality is that the president, even though he is limited in his diplomatic powers, because he is the face of our country, he is the one who's really charged with that role. Chief of state or chief citizen, this is really important in our country because we don't have royalty. So if you think about, like in Great Britain, think about like how enamored people are with their royalty and the things that we pay attention to. It's all very ceremonial. It's all very human. It's fascination with their weddings and like the ceremony part. Well, we don't have that. So we expect our president to be that, to exemplify our humanity, to be a moral role model, but also to be human and to show that side to us so that they can just kind of show us what our potential is. Presidents serve as commander-in-chief. I cannot stress this enough. And I will say that in my mind, this is probably the most unchecked role that the American president has. Because of the president's ability to declare troop movement and decide what we are going to do with the military, and truly, that power lies in his or her hands. And yeah, the president can't declare war, but when's the last time we declared war? So this is an enormous power and an enormous responsibility. President also serves as chief of party. So remember that the president, while he or she does not technically lead the party as a member of party in government, the highest ranking member of party in government, they definitely set the tone for what their party is going to look like. Okay? So we'll just look at some pictures, and if I were there, I'd ask you questions, but I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. So this is something you saw from the video, that whole idea of the Johnson treatment. This is most assuredly chief legislator, using whatever is necessary to try to get the legislature to pass your agenda. President Obama, most presidents will invite members or people who have, most presidents will invite winners of the Super Bowl or the Stanley Cup or like different things like that to come to the White House. That's very chief of state. It's very exciting, but we like that as a people. You are going to see a lot of pictures of chief of state. That's because chief of state is picture worthy. That doesn't mean that's the bulk of what they do. It's just, fun to take pictures of. This can also be chief of state. He did a phenomenal job of this after 9/11, really reaching out to people. I'll never forget hearing this speech. where he spoke for the megaphone and he said, we hear you. We're here. We see you, and we see your struggles, and we are here. And I think that that's important. We've already studied how FDR so successfully used radio to personalize the presidency and to come into people's homes during a time of real strife. So when we look here, exemplifies President being commander-in-chief, President welcoming back soldiers and or fallen soldiers. This right here, if you guys have ever heard of this before, this is called the football. It carries the codes for nuclear war. And just the fact that the president has that at his or her disposal, that's extraordinary. And that is an incredible, incredible amount of power that lies with one person. Presidents also serve as chief diplomat, like we said. We talked last class about negotiating executive agreements, recognition about Nixon and his trip to China, and just establishing relationships. Most of our modern presidents have been notorious for forming relationships with particular foreign heads of state, and a lot of times it's personality. Who did they click with? And some of those relationships have definitely altered history. Again, a little chief of state. So every year at Thanksgiving, the American president will pardon a turkey. So in a silly way, using their pardoning power to offer forgiveness to a turkey. And they usually use that as an opportunity to extend well wishes to the troops, because it's around Veterans Day. President serving as chief legislator, that last step, signing important bills into law, it's a very ceremonial thing. Usually what happens when you see the president signing these bills, they're surrounded by legislators, potentially members of interest groups, community members, people who fought really hard for that bill. And if you look right here, all of these pins, these are ceremonial pins, and they're actually keepsakes. And so the president will sign a portion of his name and then give a pin to somebody and sign a portion of his name and give it to somebody. And it's, it's ceremony, but it's obviously pretty important too. Again, more chief of state, using that office as an opportunity to extend compassion to people who are grieving or to a nation who might potentially be grieving. Definitely chief executive here. The ability to issue an executive order, which is a piece of paper that says you will do this, and it might as well be law. That's incredibly powerful. Presidents set the tone, and they can decide what the relationship's going to look like with the legislature, meeting with foreign heads of state, meeting with key leaders in our community. Great photo opportunity. But again, it's going to set the culture for what their administration will look like, which is a very CEO kind of thing to do. And presidents serve as chief of party. That they reach out to the electorate. They have to understand how party works, which can be daunting sometimes. Sometimes it's difficult for them because they don't get to be as autonomous as some of them would like to be. We already kind of mentioned these commemorative pens. The president also once a year, remember, delivers the State of the Union address. And behind the president, you will see the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House there at that ceremony. And then lots more examples of the president serving as chief of state. Okay, so now what I need you to do is to flip your paper over, and you have 2 more discussion questions to answer. So if you guys will work together to answer those questions, and then when you're done, I'll give you your next steps.